morning. Good afternoon to those of you who live in Eastern and Central Time like I do. We're going to have a great chat here. I'm just going to briefly kind of introduce us. I'll welcome our panelists on stage. And it's something we've been working on at Edge and the Voice of Milk brands. In addition to Edge Dairy Farmer Cooperative, Minnesota Milk, the Dairy Business Association, which is centered in Wisconsin, and Farmers for Sustainable Food. We represent about 1,400 dairy farms in those different sectors, and all of them have to sell their milk to someone, and the buyers of that milk have to receive it. And so we've all heard about the experiences of the past 5 years with different things, and we've got 3 experts that I'm going to invite on stage right now to talk with me about this. First up, we've got Jacob Bry. Jacob's a 4th-generation farmer and co-owner of Bry Cycle Farm, a dairy farm in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, along with his brother Tony. The farm has been in the Bry family since 1904. Along with their wives and a team of dedicated employees, they have grown the farm from 100 milking cows and 500 acres to 1,400 milking cows and 1,700 acres. In addition to raising their own young stock, they custom raise heifers for other farms. They are passionate about registered Holsteins and place an emphasis on improving genetics in their herd using embryo transfer and genomics. The Brys also raise Holstein Angus animals from birth to finish through Bry Cycle Beef. Bry Cycle Farm is a founding member of Peninsula Pride Farms, a farmer-led conservation group in their community, as well as a demonstration farm through the Door-Kewaunee County Demonstration Farm Network. Please help me welcome Jacob. Next up, we've got Trevor Fleege with AgriPure. Trevor is the Senior Director of Milk Procurement and Commodity Management. He's responsible for the milk procurement and commodity risk management at AgriPure. AgriPure is the 3rd largest cheese processor in the U.S., producing over 1 billion pounds of cheese per year across 7 plants located in Idaho, Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. AgriPure procures over 10 billion pounds of milk per year in the U.S. from over 300 producers, and Trevor has spent his entire life in the dairy industry, having grown up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin and working in the dairy businesses at Kraft, Nestle, and AgriPure. Help me welcome Trevor. And last but not least, but furthest traveled, is Jacob Larson. Jacob is a 3rd-generation dairy farmer from Okeechobee, Florida. He is co-owner with his brother Travis and father Woody. The 2 dairies that make up Larson Dairy Inc. milk 5,000 cows. The family farms are committed to producing high-quality fluid milk for Floridians. Jacob is a 3rd year as a president of Southeast Milk Inc., SMI. SMI is a small milk marketing cooperative that provides high-quality, conventionally and organically produced milk for its customers throughout the Southeast. Jacob and his wife, Danielle, have 3 children, Luke, Lily, and Levi, who are all teenagers and keep him very active. The couple have diversified their agriculture interests into a cow-calf ranch, row crops, and purebred Brahman herd. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you.
So, gentlemen, we're with a touchy subject here, so I really thank you for diving in. As we talked in preparation for this, I learned that some of you wanted the milk price to be higher, and some of you wanted the milk price to be maybe not lower, but as less as possible compared to the competition. So, I'd like to start with Jacob. We'll start with, I'll go full names, Jacob Larson, and we'll come this way.
Okay.
What's going really well, you think, in the processor-farmer relationship?
It's a really good lead-off question, Lucas. I'll say that in our milk marketing cooperative in Southeast Milk, we have less than 100 dairies that make up our farmer-owned cooperative. As the elected president of the cooperative, I probably have a stronger relationship than most of the other dairy farms with our processors. We have less than 10 processors that we sell our milk to, and being in the Southeast, it's a very high fluid area. Class 1 utilization is over 80%, so the Class 1 mover calculation is pretty important to us. We survive on Class 1, and we survive on overorder premiums. It costs a lot of money to balance fluid milk plants. And so as time goes along, I think the processors have wanted to know more about the farms that are producing milk for them. And so those relationships are continuing to grow. I will say in 2017, we had a very large, domestic terrorism attack with animal welfare in our area in the Southeast. And it was proven that it wasn't just isolated to there, that those cowboys from the Southeast, they're all over the country. If these guys want to attack a farm, attack a livelihood or a business, they can do it. And so the undercover videos, did a lot to harm our industry at first, but in the next few months to years, those relationships have become much stronger as the processors want to say, hey, we really need to know our farmers better, and the farmers want to say the same thing. Hey, we need to know our processors better, and they need to know what we're facing, and we need to know what they're facing. At the end of the day, Lucas, dairy farmers are passionate about what they do. We know that we produce a high-quality, very nutritious product for consumers. At the same time, we know we have to make a profit. Processors are there too. They need to make a profit. So at the end of the day, we want to be fair and we want to be sustainable, and we'll get to sustainability, but in my mind, sustainability is profitability.
Thank you. Yeah, Trevor, how about you? What's going well in these relationships?
Well, first I'll say I appreciate the invitation to come here and speak on this topic. I think it's a really important one, and one that, as an industry, I think we need to get better at. Maybe not been the best at it in the past, but I think just as things evolve and there's just more integrations within supply chains, that it's something that we need to get better at. I think one of the things that I think is going well and has been for a long time is when we engage with our producers and people from AgriPure go out to the farms and see what's going on, you really see that pride and passion come through very strongly in what they do. And it's a motivator for us in our business to try to be really good at what we do, try to be a good market for the milk, and try to give some confidence to the producers that supply us milk that we are a good long-term market for them and are going to be here for the long term. So I think that it continues to evolve, but I think it is, and hopefully we'll continue to get stronger.
And Jacob Bry, what are you thinking is the best or the improving, the things that we don't need to improve, things are already going really well?
Yeah, so a little bit to piggyback off of Trevor and Jacob here. It's things are always changing. Before COVID, I feel like there maybe wasn't as much communication between processor and producer. COVID obviously threw a big wrench in a lot of everybody's plans. Kind of going back to even what Jacob said, before it was the animal welfare, then it was the BST discussion, then it was tail docking. With COVID, everything that came with that. So what's it going to be next, right? That's the $1 million question. Really, none of us know about. But one thing that I can speak to AgriPure is I guess Trevor and I it's a little bit more intimate of a conversation here. But they've done these AgriPure producer communication emails that have been going out. That's not something that we typically had, from anyone at AgriPure. We all want to do well. We know that we need AgriPure to do well for our farmer to do well. And being a young farmer, we're bullish about the future of the dairy industry. We want to grow. We want them to grow. And I think that maybe just taking a different mindset, that it's not necessarily a us versus them approach. It's we're kind of all in this together approach. I think just the transparency is huge, and it's been getting better, and looking forward to what's going to be next.
Right. Jacob Larson, we'll keep in the same order for the second question. You've got 10 different processors. I'm guessing they're all the same and want the same thing, and it's easy. But if there was something that should be improved, I'm kidding, of course, if there was something that should be improved, what do you think the relationship is there? And then as a cooperative, of course, you're in a unique situation where you're also owned by the farmers who ship milk to you. What do you believe that your patrons want as improvement, or what have you heard that you hope to improve at the co-op level?
Good. Well, I'll say, as I've been able to go and talk to these different processors, one common theme, they have a lot of common themes, but when we talk about price, the common theme is, competition. We want to be competitive. And we've got customers that don't mind paying whatever it is, as long as all the other customers are paying the same price. And so I think that's the door wide open for us as farmers, as an industry across the nation, as to say, hey, we've got a federal order minimum price that's mandated to pay, but is that what we want to be? Do we want to be the minimum? And so what can we do collectively as farmers, whether it's cooperatives working together or whoever it is? We know there's independent shippers that are going to take that minimum price. and that they just want the foot in the door and to be in that market or in that space. And at the end of the day, that should be profitable to their business because they're not paying the balancing cost of balancing fluid plants. Lucas, that was the first question. Of course, there's a lot of things that are in common amongst all of them. They want to make sure cows are taken care of well. They want to make sure that we're doing our part. At Southeast Milk, we're all members of the FARM program. And so as we assure them that we're responsible managers, we see workforce development becoming a component in that. We see environmental strategies as to what are we going to do to mitigate carbon emissions or any type of considered pollution of downstream watersheds or so on and so forth. And so those issues, some of them are geographical, some of them are more localized, but as a milk source for these processors to have, we need to do our part to ensure that we're doing our best. And so I think that that's a common thread amongst all of them. But there was a second part of your question I don't think I answered.
To your patrons at the cooperative, what do they ask you for?
Well, so for instance, in Florida, the minimum wage went up another $1 this year. Next year, it'll go up another $1. And how do you pass that along? The same way Walmart does. They get less employees. So we have to figure out as a business, if we're going to incur that cost that we can't control, how can we mitigate it? And so what can we do? And that's part of what you see with attrition and consolidation that Trevor was talking about earlier. We're all trying to be profitable and to sustain, to be here, we have to be. And so we have to figure out how to cut that cost or at least spread it over more volume of milk. So it all screams efficiency. And that's one of the things that makes America just amazing is that we have the safest, most affordable, most abundant food supply in the world. And we're the envy of a lot of other countries.
Thank you. Trevor, same question. What do you think we need to improve in this relationship?
Yeah, I think the big thing is transparency. And a lot of that burden is on the processor too, right? To really communicate what's going good, what's not going so well, not just within the processor, producer relationship, but just generally in the industry. Like, what are we seeing in the marketplace? What are we seeing from our customers? What are we seeing from our competitors? And I think it's something that we're trying to get a little bit better at to sort of give that context to our producers so they can understand, just the environment that we're all operating in. I think as far as just the direct relationship with our producers, I think there's a lot of things that really go quite well. We're very fortunate at AgriPure to have a great group of producers that supply us milk. And I think the expectations, just like the expectations our customers have on us, there's sort of a baseline expectation, call it like a specification, right? Like milk quality, somatic cell, animal welfare, those sort of things. But I think beyond that, what I really do appreciate is when producers are engaged. They ask us questions. A lot of times they're tough questions. And that, in many ways, forces us to evaluate ourselves and think about, okay, here's a concern. Here's what this producer is maybe seeing from a competitor of ours. And not just price, but just generally how they're handling things. And is there opportunity for us to get better within that? And if there is, great, we'll strive for that. If not, we'll try to explain why we can't do certain things. But I always encourage our producers, ask the tough questions. And if they're coming from a good place, we're going to give it a lot of thought, and because that's how we get better too. When we're asked the tough questions from our producers and also asked the tough questions from our customers when we're challenged, that's how we become better at what we do. It's how we become more efficient. That's how we kind of project forward on what needs to get done so that we're not always lagging our competitors. So it's all good, but I think it all starts with transparency. Thank you.
Jacob Rye.
These guys are stealing a lot of the thunder. They're doing a really good job. Just something that kind of came to mind is, as farmers, we've always, since social media came about, everybody's trying to do, we're trying to do our part, telling our story. We're trying to promote, all the things that we're doing. This is kind of a funny story. My nephew was at Thanksgiving the other day, and his sister, or my sister, it was his mom, and I asked him, how many teats does a cow have? And he said 6. And I looked at him funny, and then I'm like, no, that's not right. Then he said 8, and I'm like thinking to myself, like, we think we're doing a good job, but we got to even do better. Like this is my nephew. He comes to the farm, a couple times a year and all this stuff. So I guess where I'm getting with this is like, just continuous improvement. We got to be open-minded. We're trying to, run our businesses, have our families, grow our farms, do all these different things. And so when we have, we feel like, for example, with AgriPure, like, they're doing their part too. Obviously, they need to do their part to sell more cheese and to grow their business. So it's really, a kind of relationship that's growing. And like I said earlier, it's really kind of started since COVID, especially up in our area. We were really fortunate with AgriPure. We didn't have to dump any milk. They were really, really good to us. So, just trying to keep up our end of the bargain, I think, in the long run is going to pay off.
Trevor, to you, when communication's great and we'll keep improving, that's good. What is the communication or maybe the phone call or the text that you don't want to hear from your farmers that, hey, if you would have communicated that to me 6 months earlier, that would have been very helpful? What's either nightmare or just that thing that if you could have told me ahead of time for me as a processor, that would be very helpful? And of course, we'll let our Jacob colleagues here answer opposite.
Yeah, I think, there's always sort of the discrete issues that you don't want to hear, about. And I think, if there's something where we think there's a risk, let's say there's a contamination, a manure spill or something, right? And the fear that we'll have is that, it gets in the media and gets taken out of context before we can sort of jump ahead, with our customers or even with the media to sort of get ahead of that messaging, so that, we're not blindsided by that. We're very fortunate. We've not really had many of those situations, and the ones that we've had where, an accident happens or something, maybe gets taken out of context and we'll get into the local media. We're ready for it. So I think definitely if there's something that happens on a dairy that you think will get some negative press or think will have some sort of backlash, I mean, on our end, we have the same motivations. There's a codependency that exists between producers and processors, and the last thing either one of us wants is a message to get distorted or a message to get out to our customers, and then all of a sudden they're asking questions. We don't have the answers right away because we didn't know about it. I mean, I think we can help and support that in many ways and help manage some of those situations.
Jacob Bry, what was a surprise to you in communication that you might not want to happen?
Well, you obviously hear about like the the horror stories of a processor saying, hey, like I'm not going to pick up your milk anymore, things like that. That's all hearsay. It's obviously happening somewhere, but that's as dairy farmers, we all kind of know we don't like surprises. We got to milk the cows every day, and it's not something that we want to have, just come out of the ordinary. We don't know what it's going to be next though, too, right? So, looking down the road, what that might be. Maybe Jacob Larson has some, just being from a different geographical area, like what's something they've experienced down there. But we all kind of know what those are.
Go ahead, Mr. Larson.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jacob. In the Southeast, being that it's fluid, all of our processors are pretty much long-term contracts. And so, this morning we heard two speakers talk a lot about relationships and team building, and man, it's so true. I mean, there's so many vendors and things we do business with that sometimes we just don't price check them. It's that relationship that has said, hey, this is why we're doing business with them, is because they haven't let us down. For instance, refrigeration. Refrigeration is extremely important to high quality milk. And so there's refrigeration companies that do work for the processors and do work for the dairy farmers. And there's certain lines of loyalty there, and guys that have a motto of, hey, we're not going to lose a load of milk. It's going to be cold milk. And of course, with technology and things, you would get email alerts and things that, hey, a chiller's due for an oil change, or you got this motor going out, or whatever. And so we can prevent a lot of things now that we couldn't before with technology. But I think one of the things that would be very detrimental to our cooperative, our industry, is to to have a processor just go out of business. Just say, hey, and we're seeing that in the Southeast. We've seen bankruptcies in the last 5, 6, 7 years that have been pretty detrimental and part of that consolidation. And so as a farmer, I do see, hope that there is some being money put back into infrastructure and new plant being built in the Southeast. You see a lot more manufacturing going in the country as compared to fluid. So in a fluid market, we really don't want to see another plant go out of business. But that tells me on the other side, what are we doing as a team, as a relationship, to further the consumption of fluid milk? And then we can talk about the products or the things that we actually produce for in different areas. But at the end of the day, all of us are producing milk that goes into some type of processed product that needs to go through a human being. So I think there's common ground there that we all can get around and build and say, hey, how do we do this more efficiently and move more of it? And we all grow and prosper.
Well, thank all three of you for helping me lay the groundwork. So now we'll get a little more specific on our questions, and we'll start again with Trevor. Oh. And Jacob Bry had brought up requirements, and when the letter comes that says, "Hey, you now need to do this," or this new opportunity comes forward, maybe it's not a requirement, but a new challenge for your farmers if they want to take it up. From your level, where do those requests come from? Is it the end customer? Is it internal? And just when do you decide to say, yes, this is worthwhile either requiring or bringing to our farm? Can you tell us anything about that thought process?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Within our business at AgriPure, we have hundreds of customers, global customers. We're shipping product, I think, to 30, 40 different countries around the world. And within that, you get a lot of questions, not only about the products themselves, but the milk supply that's going into those products. And some of them, we get some crazy questions at times that come from maybe customers or people that don't quite understand how the dairy supply chain works. And so those questions come on almost a daily basis, and we have to sort through, okay, what's the question? What are you really trying to ask? Are you asking a question out of sort of a false concern? And sometimes we can address some of those things without having to engage with our producers. A lot of times that's what happens. And so you try to get to the root of it, and a lot of times we can answer those questions and sort of suffice whatever that expectation is on our own. But there are times where, and I think generally those inquiries come from a good place. A customer, for whatever reason, might want more engagement on understanding their milk supply. It could be something like, we want to validate that there's not a certain trace contaminant in the milk, which requires testing and maybe some affidavits with producers. Or we want, sustainability will be a thing that I think will, drive more of that engagement as well. And then really, I think the burden, I wouldn't say burden, but I think the responsibility that we have in our, sort of kind of being in between that is really filtering out what's a good idea, what's a bad idea, what's a good expectation, what's a bad expectation, and managing that communication. And what I try to communicate to our producers is, by the time it comes from us and we're asking that question of you, it's been vetted quite often, because the last thing we want to do on our end is just bury everyone in paperwork and all these things, sort of these wild goose chases that can happen sometimes. We've gone through a pretty exhaustive, review of it before we would bring it forward to producers. And then part of that is just making sure they understand, okay, here's where it's coming from. It's not just one customer, it's sort of the industry expectation, and try to turn it into more of an opportunity than a mandate. Not always easy, though.
Sorry. Thank you. Jacob Bry, being on the other side of that equation, how does your farm evaluate when a new question comes to you? And it might not be your milk processor, it could be some other place that you're selling something to. You've got customers on your farm and the beef. How do you make those decisions on, we should do that, or maybe we should even go further than they're asking? Just tell us how that thought process works, please.
People like to ask questions, but which is great, and but really they're doing that because they're curious and they want to know our story. Kind of like going off what we talked about earlier. farmers have a really good story to tell. We can tell our story, and then the light bulb goes off in people's heads, right? So I think that's a little bit on Trevor's end too, when he gets a question from one of his customers, and he can say, hey, well, our farms are doing X, Y, and Z. And they're like, okay, well, that sounds good. One thing that we're really doing at the grassroots level up in our area, we farm in a very environmentally sensitive area. We're surrounded by water. We have fractured bedrock that we farm on. So my ancestors really did us a good one on that when they settled there. But we have a local watershed group that, we were all kind of not telling our story about 10 or 15 years ago. These activists were telling the story for us, and we kind of took it on our own and said, yeah, well, we need to do better. We want agriculture to thrive in this community. We all know how many tens of millions of dollars we have invested in our farms, how much money AgriPure has invested in their facilities. So this is something that's been going on for 8 or 10 years now. But what's really cool is seeing the difference it's making. And now with a Climate Smart program that we're involved with through USDA, actually tracking these metrics, not just saying, yeah, we plant cover crops and it's great, the ground is green, showing that we have less soil loss and we have more water holding capacity, and hopefully the streams are going to be a little bit cleaner in a couple more years from now. So I think that'll be something that, we started doing it not thinking about, maybe the processor relationship at the time, but it's kind of evolved and morphed into that, and I think that's pretty powerful. And we're in the infancy stages of this project, and I think that moving forward, we don't know where it's going to take us, but selfishly, I think, as a farm that's been putting a lot of effort into this movement, like someday could we be like a preferred supplier to where we ship our milk, or could other farms say this to, they ship their milk to Belgioso or to whoever they ship their milk to, because, farmers, we all get along, but we're all competitive, and we all know there's so many pounds of milk that fit in the milk silos at the plant that we want to fill up. So, what's it's going to be that gives us the competitive advantage, to tell a good story to AgriPure that they can tell to their customers and ship more product.
Yeah, thanks. And Jacob Larson, maybe somewhat similar to Trevor, but you've got the feedback loop both ways. So those processors are maybe asking you for requirements or recommendations for another level, but then on the other hand, you've got a set of farmers who might tell you no or yes, and you talked about minimum wage, but
Yeah.
do those things come through in fluid milk, and do you think they're fluid milk?
Absolutely.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It wasn't that long ago, it was in the early 90s that RBST came out, and Monsanto at the time had it, and Posilac was a very well-used, well-known hormone that helped cows make more milk. And man, this country made a lot of milk with it. And dairy farmers were profitable with it. And it didn't take long for, about a decade, and then all of a sudden it became, hey, the processors say, whoa, we don't want this anymore. And that was a big one. That came at almost a rushing halt. And so as producers, we said, okay, look, we're going to take this out of our toolbox as managing cows, and we're going to certify and sign all these affidavits that we're not going to use it. What's the premium going to be? Because we know we've got cows that didn't get bred. We're going to sell. We're going to have a high cull rate, and at the end of the day, there might be less milk on the market to be able to sell you, and so that comes at a cost. And so, in the fluid market, we were able to get about a 50 cents per hundredweight over-order premium for signing those affidavits and not using it. But what happened? Within a decade, the 50 cents went away, and now there's no premium for not using it. So I think that those challenges that are facing processors, and they bring to producers their challenges, but those relationships need to be strong enough to say, hey, let's work through it together. At the end of the day, the money has to come from the consumer that's ultimately consuming our product, and has to filter back to the farm to where we have enough to operate on. And so for us, right now we're dealing with a customer that really wants all of their milk to be sourced A2. They just feel like in the fluid market that their brand of milk if they can put it in school systems and so on and so forth, and we can verify that it's all A2, that they'll have less kids with upset stomach and so on and so forth. And we're like, okay, we think we can do that, but there's a cost. What level of premium are you willing to pay? Because remember, the other customers of the same farmers are going to say, hey, wait a minute, you provided that for this customer, what about us? And so we got to raise the bathtub.
Yeah, absolutely. Great example. So thank you all very much. I'll now open it up to all three of you just as we kind of talk about communication. We've talked about trust. We've talked about communication. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I get the sense there's some farmers out there who maybe don't trust their processor or don't trust their co-op. What would you tell that farmer, or maybe what would you tell that processor that might be emulating that without knowing that? What are some of the best practices you think that if a farmer does not trust the processor or vice versa, are there a top 3 things or a top 1 thing you believe that they should do to turn that around, or maybe what should they look for in somebody new to change that? So any of you. It's an easy one.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about communication all morning, right? And like having the difficult conversation, nobody wants to do that. And, you know, there's only so many places, you know, it seems like there's less and less processors or co-ops out there that are taking milk. And, you know, 15 years ago, for example, you know, like we were shipping to a local cheese factory, you know, grew them, and then, you know, we had 4 or 5 processors, you know, lined up that wanted the milk. It's not really like that currently, but could it be like that again in 10 years? Who knows? But I think just having open dialogue, open communication, talking to your field man, you know, sending him a text or giving him a call, and just kind of seeing, hey, what's up? Where are things looking? You know, is there going to be some more room for some more milk, or are you guys going to add processing or things like that? But that's all stuff that we do every day, right? Like, we're dairy farmers, we're on the farm, and we're talking to our milkman and hearing what the rumors are, and you know, that's all the stuff that we have, just kind of built into what we do every day. But it's kind of sound like we're beating a dead horse, but I think communication and transparency is huge.
Trevor or Jacob, anything to add?
I'll just say that, you know, any thriving business needs to be able to recapitalize itself, pay a mortgage, pay the employees a fair price, and grow. And the American farmer is really good at overproducing. If we do something that works, we want to replicate it and do it again and again and again. And so supply and demand is a pretty basic economic model, you know. And right now, what we've seen in this past year is replacement cows have been tight, the milk supply has been tight, and so that supply being tighter and demand being higher has helped all of our prices to increase. And so usually what cures that is overproduction. And so we ought to be able to be in good enough relationships with our processors, whether we're fluid or manufactured or whatever it is, that we've got a new sale coming online, or we got a new market that we're tapping into, or we're going to reimagine milk, and we're going to form a new product, and we think that it'll do this, and to allow all of us to grow. We don't like to see plants go out of business, and we really don't like to see farms go out of business. But at the end of the day, we do understand consolidation and attrition. And so having that relationship, like we've been talking about, is really important. But at the same time, we also need to know when to pull the lever and constrict. And maybe we need to diversify, whether it's a processor or a farmer. Instead of milking more cows and making more milk and making the price cheaper, maybe we ought to do something different.
Thank you. Trevor, anything to add?
Yeah, I think my opinion is, you know, I think now, if I was in a producer's shoes, I think now more than ever, it's so important to really understand, you know, the buyer, your market for milk, and not just, you know, this month's price, but ask the questions about, you know, where's the milk going? What products are you making? Are you reinvesting into your operations? What's your growth vision? Is there a growth vision? What product types are you focused on? Is that a growing category or is that a shrinking category? How dependent are you on the export market? I mean, there's a list of questions that I think are important to ask, because I think from what I've seen over the last, maybe 20 years is you had a competitive milk market where everyone kind of paid generally the same price. Everyone was kind of in the, sort of the same line of business. But now I think you see a lot more disparity on producer, sort of pay pricing programs, not just the price, but the programs themselves. And so understanding what drives all these different things, why do you do it this way? What agreements do you have with customers? And feel good about that. And if you don't feel good about that, you're not getting the answers that you want, or you're not getting answers, find someone in that organization within the processor that can answer those questions. Because I think that as we look forward, the regulatory requirements on processing assets are going up. And so, things like wastewater, these are $1 million, $10, $100 million investments that plants have to make, and growth and modernization, and are you reducing your labor costs and pursuing technology? Because that'll tell you, is that processor going to be around for your next generation, or are their days numbered? Because I think dairy is a very unique industry in that there hasn't really been a lot of consolidation. There has been, but if you look at other agricultural industries, I mean, you have 3 or 4 companies that dominate everything. And I don't think we're going to get that way in dairy overnight, but it'll move that direction. And so understanding where your market fits into that.
Well, thank you. We've talked over and over here about communication, relationships, transparency. But we're dealing with independent business people, dairy farmers who don't want to be told what to do all across this nation, or at least that's my sense. Maybe some of them that like to be told what to do, but my sense is that they don't. So how comfortable should we be with each other? We're talking about transparency now. What's off limits? So maybe we'll start with Jacob Larson. What's off limits for you? What should a processor, and maybe in a co-op level, it's a little unique, but what do you think that end processor maybe doesn't need to know or doesn't deserve to know to you? Or is there a limit? And then Jacob Bry, you can answer next.
Yeah, I think we're pretty private people. We don't really want to share our balance sheet with anybody. At the same time, there's a level of transparency that I think is fair. Personally, my farm was under one of those undercover investigations and had an animal welfare issue, and there were things that were certainly just way out of line. That was very embarrassing. And people around the country were talking about it, saying, man, I can't believe they don't have video cameras in those milking parlors. And the next thing you know, you got a processor wanting to have access to the video cameras of surveillance around the farm. You got other people in law enforcement saying, why isn't there chain link fence all the way around that farm and one way in, one way out? And so you have these kind of issues and things. And so I think being able to sit down and have conversations, and we talked earlier today about emotion and how a lot of decisions are made probably too quickly and out of emotion. And I think there's a saying, let cooler heads prevail. I think that's really important when there's a hot topic or an issue arises. I think there's things there that they need to know, and then there's things they don't. And where do you draw the line, or where do you come to a mutual agreement of what's fair? I think it just has to be talked out. And then you've got producers that say, they take a hard line and they're not going to do that. They'll sell their cows before they do that, or before they're forced to join that cooperative, they're going to go out of business, and that happens. It's real. As a member of the FARM program, there's criteria there. If a farmer's not meeting some of that, they get an MCAT and they need to correct it. And they've got time to do that, but then they need to correct it. One of the worst things you do as a cooperative is have to tell a member you're no longer going to pick up their milk because they're not complying with a certain regulation.
Jacob Bry, anything you disagree with or want to add here?
No, I mean, that's something I've never thought, like having a processor that, like want to look at your security cameras. To me, that's pretty personal. I think that we can all agree that that's probably something that we wouldn't want to share. But a little bit like I said earlier, just personally, I'm a young farmer. I know that I'm a fourth generation farmer. You know, my brother and I and our wives have kids, and maybe they're going to want to farm someday. So, not that we got to like sell our soul, but we just need to be open. I mean, we need to be successful. They need to be successful. So maybe that's just a generational thing because I'm young and willing to try things, you know, but maybe as I get a little bit farther along in my career, I'll have, you know, things that, you know, you obviously, okay, well, that's off limits or whatnot. But, and then just something I thought of when Jacob was talking about our speaker this morning, you know, we talk about like, we have maintenance plans on our farms, and he talked about having a people plan, or, you know, maybe we should even have, you know, be sitting down with our processors or our field mans and, you know, like giving them 3 or 5 year plans about, hey, let's just be upfront and honest. This is what we want to do. Is this going to be possible, right? Or how can we get to this point? So maybe we're having producer plans or whatever it's going to be. But that's just something that came to mind, you know, like, so.
Thank you. And Trevor, the reverse, you're a private company. What do you think farmers should and maybe shouldn't expect to know? Where's the limit on transparency within the processor?
Yeah, I think it's probably specific to each processor how much they share and don't share, and you know, I think whether you're an independent processor, proprietary, or you're a co-op, I think there's also quite a bit of differences within co-ops on how much information they share as well. I think for us, we try to lean towards being as transparent as we possibly can, but sometimes there's a risk to that, or if you share too much information and then that information sort of gets out, you know, information can go viral really quickly, and so information gets out and then it's taken the wrong way, and the worst thing, you know, if a customer gets their hands on it and then all of a sudden they can use that as leverage against you, you know, in a pricing negotiation, those sort of things, and so that's where we have to be a little cautious on how transparent we are, but generally, we try to share as much as we possibly can, and a lot of that's, you know, upon the producer to ask those questions too. I mean, I think there's some producers that just say, hey, you know, I want to do my thing. I want to make sure I'm in a solid market, and that's all I really want to know. And there's some that really want to be engaged in what are you seeing in the exports next month? What are you seeing on milk supply in this local market? You know, hey, if I'm over my base volume next month, is that going to be an issue? Or if I'm like, so there's that. It's very widespread, I think, across producers too. But I do think that's something, just given the nature of milk, it's perishable. It's not like a crop that you can throw in a bin and then figure out how I'm going to sell it later. It's constantly coming at us, and so it almost requires you to be as transparent as you possibly can.
Jacob Bry, as we're looking 3 to 5 years out in your family's business, is there anything that you haven't been asked for yet? You talked a little about the environmental portion that you're diving into, but is there anything that you're planning to invest in or hope to focus your farm on that you haven't been asked for yet, in anticipation that a processor or other processors might ask down the road in customer demand, changing milk market, sustainability, conservation, animal welfare, or components? Is there anything you're thinking, this is where the customer is going to be, and so we're going to position our business as such?
Well, yeah, like just the kind of the phase everything is in right now with sustainability. That's the big buzzword right now on the conservation side. You know, I think there's a ton of potential on the genetic side of dairy farming as well. You know, our customer is going to be saying, are you breeding the most feed efficient or the most healthy or long-lived, profitable? They won't use the word profitable, but you know, long-lived cow that you can, and if not, why not? Because is that you're not treating your animals as well as you possibly could because you're not using the right genetics, you know. So we don't know what's going to be coming, but that could be one instance, you know. But I think it's only going to be, you know, we're all shipping a commodity, right? Milk's a commodity, cheese is a commodity, everything's a commodity, right? So it's the low-cost producer is going to prevail, but you know, it's if you can be the low-cost producer but have X, Y, and Z, well, maybe that'll make the difference between being in business or not being in business.
And Jacob Larson, anything that you think your farm, or your fellow patrons in the cooperative are thinking about and transforming your farm to meet future processor needs that maybe aren't a requirement yet today?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and Jacob did a good job answering it. A few years back, before COVID, we really looked hard at anaerobic digesters and where this carbon space was going and what the buzz was all about, and we partnered with an energy company and put in some anaerobic digesters on a couple of our farms, and you know, there's a size and scale that makes that tick and makes it efficient, and so it bothers me that I'm not saying it picks winners and losers, but there's dairies that really have to commit to getting up to that scale if they're going to do that, and then there's other things as well. I think, you know, like I talked a little bit about minimum wage. You know, robotics are coming. I mean, it's iPads are getting cheaper, cell phones are getting cheaper, and what we can do on them is just blows me away. And what my kids can do on them blows me away. I just need to be able to make a phone call, you know, and they can run all this stuff off of one, and so that's coming. You know, we're turning on irrigation systems and stuff from a cell phone to save the man hours and the diesel to run out there and do something with it. It's pretty amazing. So I think the early adopters of technology are pretty progressive. That's not us. We usually let somebody else try it and see what works, and then if it worked for them, it might be able to work for us. Everybody's situation's a little bit unique. But I think that those efficiencies will prevail. I mean, everybody's going to be looking to save on labor, save on fuel, save on electricity, whatever it is. So we have to continue to look for those efficiencies.
And Trevor, I'd ask you to look both ways for what you can share and predict the future from the customer end. Are there things you think they're going to be asking about that haven't yet 3 to 5 years down the road? And maybe the easier question to answer is, that next farm you hope to bring into your milk sheds, what do you hope they have? What are the things that you hope they have now that might provide them a leading edge to join your operation?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a trend where, you know, the specifications for the products that we make, I mean, over time keep getting tighter and tighter, you know, in terms of, you know, say bacteria or, you know, just the tightness of the specifications. Some of that is customer expectations as they're trying to have more consistent product for what they need, which then that ties back into milk, having a very consistent, high quality milk supply that drives that into the product. There's an increasing amount of regulatory requirements. You know, you start talking about testing trace contaminants, you know, the PFAS and these things that are kind of out there, but really no one knows how to test. Well, they know how to test for it, but they don't know what the expectations of the requirements are going to come. So I think we've seen that over the years. I mean, things get tighter and tighter, and that'll continue to happen. I think sustainability is one where, you know, I think everyone's sort of trying to navigate how they're going to fit into that. I mean, the approach, you know, we're taking is we're trying to, you know, pursue it as an opportunity. There's clearly customers that we work with that are motivated, you know, to pursue those opportunities and pursue them financially as well. And so trying to figure out where those opportunities fit in and what would make sense for us and make sense for our producers as well. So that's ongoing. I think, you know, if I'm in a producer's shoes, I would ask a lot of those questions to your processor as well. Like, what are you doing in this space? What are your customers' expectations? So some customers have certain expectations and some might not. So I don't think it's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach on that, but clearly that's going to be something that's going to be, again, I like to think of it as an opportunity in the future, and that's going to require a lot more transparency as well in terms of sharing data. You know, what is the CI score of a particular farm or your milk supply, and how can we position that in a way that allows us to grow our volumes and get a price premium from certain customers, because those opportunities are there. They just need to get fleshed out yet, and that transparency has to be there between the processor and producer.
Thank you. And I think I'll go right back to you, and then if we have any questions, we can go to that. But Trevor, simple question: how do you price milk? Let us know.
I thought we were going to skip that one. No, I think, as I alluded to before, you know, I think it's important for, you know, producers to understand how that works for your market. What drives that? You know, milk pricing inherently is very complex. It's a complex commodity. You got carbohydrates, protein, and fat, and how do you value all these things, and how do you value that within the products you're making? That makes sense. I tend to lean that the simpler the better. there's milk pricing programs that are out there that are really hard to understand. We take the approach of trying to keep it very simple and then trying to communicate what that is every month and why, what's going good, what's going bad. I mean, because there should be things going good. I mean, if you're doing something right, there should be some things going good. And try to communicate that. I think the important questions to ask a processor would be, what are you doing with your earnings, right? Like, it's, a co-op, they have a different model, right? They redistribute that or reinvest that, and those are decisions. But I think as an independent processor, to be relevant long-term, you have to make earnings and you have to reinvest those earnings, for efficiencies, for growth, to be, relevant long-term. And so asking very detailed questions around that to your processor is very important. And where are they investing? What are they investing in? Are they investing? Because I think there's going to be some plants that I think haven't gotten the investment that they needed over time that are going to be challenged, and there's some that are getting invested in. And so that's something, pricing is something we wrestle with quite a lot as a processor. I mean, 85% of our cost as a business is our milk cost. And so you're always trying to balance. You want your producers to be successful. Like I said, there's a codependency that exists between producer and processor. I mean, we need to have the milk to run our plants full. If we're not running full, that is very painful financially, and we can't afford that. So there's always a balance there, but I think asking those questions to your market's very important.
Thank you. We have questions. Otherwise, I will ask these gentlemen some more.
We do, Lucas, have one question, and maybe even you yourself want to answer this or address it. We've seen a lot of it, processor expansion announcements in 2024. What can we expect to see out of these announcements in the coming years, and really what does this mean on the producer level? So do producers now have more opportunity to switch processors if they're not happy, or what does this mean?
Anyone?
Me? Yeah. I think as far as the processing capacity coming online, that's a positive thing. There's a lot of products, the dairy products that are growing and will continue to grow. We see those opportunities. But I think that'll also drive consolidation. If you'd asked me a year ago, I was pretty nervous about all this capacity coming online, but the market changed. The milk market is tighter. There's not as much available milk supply, perhaps for those plants. It's more competitive. I think that is a good thing. You don't have a surplus of milk. We don't see a surplus of milk across the country. And I would say for the last several years, you always had a surplus. Like, there was always milk if you needed it. So I think the processors that had a long-term vision, that weren't reliant on cheap spot milk, will do quite well. But I think the market's going to sort through a lot of that. But I'm generally bullish on dairy. I mean, there's categories that maybe perform better than others, but protein demand, we're seeing that really strong. So I think there's going to continue to be growth, but there's also going to be consolidation within that growth.
Yeah, I guess I just ask how many people in here have had a construction project in the past 4 years? Raise your hand, please. Very high. And how many of those finish on time? Please keep your hands up. All right, the hands have disappeared. But yeah, I think that's the one thing I've learned from people who are running cheese plants is if it says it's going to start in August of 2025, it may not start, and it probably, no matter what, won't be at 100% in August 2025. So that demand comes slower than maybe published. Do we have more questions? All right. I've got a few more for these guys, maybe more rapid fire. Let's talk about stop charges. Let's talk about true cost of howling. And let's talk about other fun things on your milk check that might confuse dairy farmers. I'm not going to ask you to opine on those necessarily, but are there things that you think should be on the milk check that aren't there today? Or are there things that will definitely be there tomorrow that we should prepare ourselves more? Another way to ask that is, what's the ideal milk check look like to you? When is too much information, to Trevor's prompt earlier, when is too much information too much information? Jacob Larson, do you have, as a co-op printing milk checks, do you have any issues with clarity in milk checks?
Well, as a cooperative, there's, I don't want to say hidden charges, but there's plenty of things in the pool. You've got secondary hauls, you've got things that when you're balancing different plants, the costs are real. If our farms don't produce enough milk in August when schools start up and there's a high demand for fluid milk, we've got to go get it from somewhere. That might be one state away, it might be 2 or 3 or 4 states away that we're just stair-stepping milk down. That's very, very expensive because I'm not going to be able to move Jacob's milk from Wisconsin without attracting it with a pretty high premium from his market. And then we've got a lot of costs involved to get just milk moved just a little ways to fill that gap. And so I don't think you can get all of that on a producer's settlement statement, but it's a pool cost. And we all share in that as farmers because at the end of the day, it's the co-op that owns the contract, and we own the co-op. So we as farmers have got to be responsible to our processors.
Trevor, any thoughts about milk check complexity and too much information, complaints either way, too much, too little?
Yeah, I think you inherently have a complex pricing mechanism, the federal orders to start with, and I think doing anything above and beyond that makes it even more complex is probably not the way to go. I think as producers are trying to manage their risk, having milk pricing that's simplified allows them to hedge their risk a little bit better. If you know that your milk is tied to Class 3 and this is how it's going to be priced forward, it helps you manage that. Obviously, you don't want surprises on the milk check. I think that's something that's terrible to do. There needs to be some transparency around that. I think sometimes it's like, in retrospect, you get a market adjustment or something like that. I think sometimes those things are unavoidable, but I think sometimes things fester for too long, and then all of a sudden it's a surprise. So again, simpler the better, and communication. If there's a risk, like, hey, we might have to do something here, enough foresight on that, I think is good.
And Jacob Bry, any other thoughts on milk checks?
Yeah, I think the keep it simple method, I think farmers really like that. Like we know how many pounds of butter, fat, and protein we ship. We can look it up on our portal and kind of look up what the price is going to be. So, okay, well, you can do some quick math on your calculator on your phone, right? One thing that probably you could touch on, I don't know if we have time because it's a pretty complex issue, like the whole PPD discussion. That's something that's kind of quieted down a little bit now. But I don't understand it, and most farmers don't. The guys that do, that's great. And then just one example, like AgriPure now, they allow us to do some contracting of the forward basis, which is something that, can help put a little bit of confidence in, what we know that is going to be coming down the road. So we all just, we all want to make money. We need to pay our bills, and having transparency in the milk check is really important.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing about PPDs before I turn it back over to Karen. It is an undefined term that we all use that the federal government has never defined. So something legislatively that we are working on with many partners, but you can call that whatever you want. So it's really, really fun when it's something that you can't hedge against, it's not defined, and we all still use it. Just want to thank you all for your conversation. I'll turn it back to you, Karen.